It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me that I might infuse a spark of being into that lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes. My candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of that half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a compulsive motion agitated its limbs. The story of Frankenstein is as familiar to us as poetry. Most of us know it secondhand. The original comes as a surprise. That its creator was a young woman, barely 18 years old, the mistress and later the wife of the romantic poet Shelley, is even more astonishing. Within the tale of Frankenstein are all the elements of early romanticism: the deep and compelling concern for man's inner life, fascination for the remote and strange, a yearning for the infinite and unattainable, plus the Gothic element, a desire to scare. There were 2 kinds of romantic women. The ones created by romantic man, women like Werther's Charlotte and Julie in Rousseau's novel La Nouvelle Heloise, women who sacrificed their lives for the love of a man. And then there were the romantic women who created themselves. These are the women who are remembered for their work. The first kind, the women who died for love, are remembered, if at all, for their deaths. Caroline von Gunderode was a poetess, but her pallid poems are overshadowed by her melodramatic death.
A beautiful young woman killed herself yesterday near Winkel, beside the Rhine. A peasant found her in the morning under the willows, at the point where the river is deepest. She had piled stones into a scarf which she had tied around her neck. But as she stabbed herself in the heart, she fell backwards onto the shore.
These are the words in which Bettina Brentano, the great German writer, tells Goethe of the suicide of her close friend, Caroline Gunderode, in the summer of 1806. Caroline was the daughter of a gentleman amateur writer from the German town of Baden. She spent her youth in Hanau, near Frankfurt. There her family held a literary salon where several foreign languages were spoken, and where everyone attending was steeped in the new romantic spirit. When Caroline's father died, the family became rapidly impoverished. Aged 17, Caroline enters the convent for high-born ladies in Frankfurt. She becomes a novice. But it is in the convent that she begins to write seriously, using a male pseudonym. During the same period, she has her first and ill-fated love affair with a young man called Friedrich Karl de Savigny. She writes,
I am angry for having given thus my heart so rapidly to a man who is probably indifferent to me. But it is so.
But the brief affair ends in a lasting friendship. Savigny marries the daughter of a merchant from Frankfurt, whose younger sister Bettina becomes Caroline's closest friend. The vital, mischievous Bettina and the pensive Gunderode perfectly complement one another. During their long walks, they discuss the latest developments in poetry, literature, and philosophy. In her book about Caroline, written many years after her friend's death, Bettina recalls Caroline's frustration at having been born a woman. Bettina quotes from her conversation.
When I read Ossian for the first time, I felt a sensation of enormous well-being. I remember that 3 years ago, the desire to die a hero's death violently took hold of me. Often I was shaken by the quite unfeminine desire to throw myself into the savage fray of battle. Why was I not born a man? I have no feeling for a woman's virtues. Everything that I am drawn to is ferocious, huge, intense, brilliant. I am a woman with the tastes of a man, but without a man's strength or a man's freedom. Bettina, we must experience many things together, understand more, and die young, in order that we may not live to see our youth fade.
Bettina's brother, Clemens Brentano. Clemens is responsible for Caroline's fatal link with the city of Heidelberg. In 1804, Clemens Brentano settles in Heidelberg, which is going through a kind of cultural renaissance, as a result of German Romanticism's focus on folk culture and national heritage. The University of Heidelberg draws to it the most famous professors in Germany. Among them is the philologist Friedrich Kreutzer, who Brentano introduces to Caroline. Their meeting seals Gunderode's destiny. She immediately imagines herself to be madly, fatally in love with the professor. Kreutzer is already married with a family. The two lovers must be discreet, but inevitably, it is not long before all Heidelberg is gossiping about them. Caroline writes a confiding letter to her first love, Savigny.
I don't know how it happened, but I always seemed to have something to tell him that no one else would understand, and it was the same for him. That is why at the beginning I looked for ways to see him alone. I used to tell him everything that was in my mind, without holding anything back. Soon I knew that I belonged to him. His own feelings for me reflected mine for him. He told me that he could not go on living this double life, that he wanted to persuade his wife that they should separate, and that he expected me to become his wife. But he feels enormous guilt, and at times it is as though I have to pay for his sin myself.
At the same time, Caroline is writing impetuous letters to Kreutzer, urging him to break the stalemate, to recognize their love, and hinting at death if he could not, would not do so.
I beg you to choose. Don't wait too long before taking the decision. Although death is kinder than life, it would be my own fault if I was taken by the former before having fully enjoyed the latter. After which I will die happily with you, because we are not made for this world. All my life I devote to you, dear and sweet friend. In this love without pretensions, without secrets, I will always be yours, in death as in life.
Kreutzer, if not emotionally dependent on his wife, was financially dependent on her. He answers Caroline's passion with prudence. When she finally decides that she must break with him, their love would seem to have burnt itself out. But they continue to correspond, and when Kreutzer eventually relents and begs Caroline to come and join him, she rushes back to him. But still they do not live together. The affair continues as before. Caroline dreams up an assortment of bizarre escapades that would enable her to live openly by his side. One scenario has her dressed as a man so that Kreutzer's family would not feel disgraced. She even hopes that the Napoleonic Wars would somehow claim him and take him to Moscow, so that she could follow him there and together they could start a new life. Kreutzer is firm in his resolution to change nothing. He tries to persuade Caroline of the virtues of compromise, and to change the emphasis of their relationship from love to literature. He undertakes the completion of her literary education, corrects and criticizes her poems, and guides her reading. Kreutzer develops elaborate arguments pointing out the rewards of patience, self-denial, discipline. Caroline is not soothed by Kreutzer's reasoning, sensing it to be not truth-telling, but evasion. Caroline flees to the banks of the Rhine, to a stunted landscape that exactly matches the state of her soul. After she last saw Kreutzer in June 1806, he has fallen seriously ill. Caroline writes to him,
I am sending you a handkerchief which should have the same significance for you as the one that Othello offered Desdemona. I have gashed my left breast just above the heart, and I have collected the drops of blood on this fabric. Bring it to your lips. It is my heart's blood. This handkerchief is a talisman protecting you against discouragement and doubt. It will be for you a sweet token.
It is in Winkel on the Rhine, where the Brentano family owns a vineyard, that the drama finally erupts into tragedy. By mistake, Caroline opens a letter from Kreutzer that is not intended for her. In the letter, he reveals his intention of finally breaking with her. For Caroline, it is the end.
I cannot live only to contemplate my dreams forever.
One of her friends writes of her,
She cannot live without love. Without love, all her being dissolves into lethargy. Her heart is bigger than this world. Only a deep love can keep it beating. If the love dies, the heart breaks.
A last letter from Caroline reaches Kreutzer.
I love you until death, my sweet and dear friend. I wish only to live with you, or to die with you. Our lot is a sad one. I envy rivers that can unite and flow together. We are still apart. Better to die than to live thus.
Women can express what they feel. That sublime abandon, that melancholy grief, those all-powerful feelings by which they live or die. And these will stir more emotion in more hearts than all the pages from the exalted imaginations of the poet.
Madame de Stael. Women can express what they feel. The writing of three sisters living in the bleak grandeur of the north of England gloriously demonstrates the truth of Madame de Staël's assertion. The Brontes. The name belongs to the collective consciousness. Their lives in true romantic tradition are synonymous with the romantic imagination. And the haunted, bleak landscape of the Yorkshire moors looks like a strangely familiar film set, built especially for the incredible mythology of these brief lives.
Fragments from the Life of Charlotte Bronte by Mrs. Gaskell. Against the background of dun and purple moors, rising and sweeping away higher than the church, rises the village of Haworth, visible to the traveller 2 miles before he arrives. The flagstones which pave the steep streets are placed endways in order to give a better hold to the horses' feet. But even with this help, they seem to be in constant danger of slipping backwards. The church lies a little off the main road on the left. The parsonage stands at right angles to the road, facing down upon the church. The graveyard rises about the church and is terribly full of upright tombstones.
The macabre playground, the mournful garden for Charlotte, Emily, Anne. They needed no tombstones as souvenirs of the constant presence of death. When they were still children, their mother died. Their 2 oldest sisters died 4 years later. But it is not the graveyard which provides the themes for the great romantic literature produced in this remote corner of England. The themes come from the moors. The idea of liberty, the horrible and marvelous freedom, the nature of solitude, the myths of a lost paradise. In this desolate, windswept landscape, the 3 sisters admit no outsiders into their lonely world. Only that strange companion, imagination.
Excerpt from Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. And who cares for imagination? Who does not think it a rather dangerous, senseless attribute akin to weakness, perhaps partaking of frenzy, a disease rather than a gift of the mind? Probably all think it so, but those who possess or fancy they possess it, to hear them speak, you would believe that their eyes would be dim if that flame did not refine their vision, that they would be lonely if this strange companion abandoned them. You would suppose that it imparted some glad hope to spring, some fine charm to summer, some tranquil joy to autumn, some consolation to winter, which you do not feel. All illusion, of course. But fanatics cling to their dream and would not give it up for gold.
Imagination is an unlikely legacy from a pious Methodist minister, but Patrick Bronte had literary ambitions. Both he and his wife were well-read and loved reading. This was their gift to their children. Mrs. Bronte dies young. While Charlotte looks after her brother and sisters with maternal care, the Reverend Bronte, a man who was at times tyrannical, spends a good deal of his time teaching his children the rudiments of history, literature, and general politics. Since the death of his wife, barely a few months after the birth of Anne, he leaves domestic matters to his sister-in-law, Mrs. Bramwell. She is a kind and intelligent woman who helps to soften the inbuilt harshness of the old Haworth presbytery. The exalted imagination of the Brontes overflowed into real life. The children imagined fictitious countries ravaged by political struggles, and intrigues leading to mighty battles in which they took part. They first get the idea from a box of toy soldiers that the Reverend Bronte gives to his son. Each child chooses the figure with which he or she has the most affinities, and invents for it a dream destiny. Out of these games came entire worlds which they recorded in minute pamphlets. So prolific was this legendary creation that in words it equals their entire combined publications. Angira and its sequel, Gondel, were miniature, self-sufficient worlds, comparable only to the self-sufficient world they created within Haworth itself. The sisters painted by their brother Branwell, naively the same, subdued. Emily, the most reclusive of the sisters, is also the most daring in her literary attempts. Anne, the youngest, the most self-effacing, who would write a shocking novel about love, sex, marriage, and contained within the most feminist of all the Bronte novels, the tragic story of the disintegration of their brother Branwell. But it was Charlotte, the eldest, who gave direction to the extraordinary production of literature in that bleak outpost of Romanticism. Charlotte, who sought publication for herself and her sisters, encouraged first by the confidence she felt not in her own genius, but in the genius of Emily.
One day, in the autumn of 1845, I accidentally lighted on a manuscript volume of verse in my sister Emily's handwriting. I looked it over, and something more than surprise seized me. A deep conviction that these were not common effusions, nor at all like the poetry women generally write. I thought them condensed and terse, vigorous and genuine. To my ear, they also had a peculiar music, wild, melancholy, elevating.
Every evening at 9 o'clock, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne began to pace around the parsonage table. They turned about for hours, like wild animals in a cage. During this strange ritual, they talked over their literary projects and sometimes read aloud from Shakespeare or the Romantic poets, and exchanged ideas about the makeup of romantic characters.
We had very early cherished the dream of one day becoming authors. This dream suddenly acquired strength and took the character of resolve. We agreed to arrange a small selection of our poems and possibly to get them printed. We veiled our names under those of Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell, names positively masculine. We had a vague impression that authoresses are liable to be looked on with prejudice. The book was printed. It is scarcely known, and all of it that merits to be known are the poems of Ellis Bell, Emily.
Poem written by Emily Bronte. I'm happiest when most away I can bear my soul from its home of clay. On a windy night when the moon is bright and the eye can wander through worlds of light. When I am not, and none besides, nor earth, nor sea, nor cloudless sky, but only spirit wandering wide through infinite immensity.
Emily is today best known for her great novel Wuthering Heights. Its anti-hero Heathcliff is one of the most terrible figures in literature, comparable only to the doomed heroes of Dostoevsky. The novel's craggy power horrified many contemporary readers used to gentler and more sweetly reasonable romances. But Emily's sister Charlotte instantly recognized the novel's true quality and its special character. She likens the making of the book to a sculptor hewing shapes out of the moor's own granite.
Wuthering Heights was hewn in a wild workshop with simple tools out of homely materials. The statuary found a granite block on a solitary moor. Gazing thereon, he saw how from the crag might be elicited the head, savage, smart, sinister. A form moulded with at least one element of grandeur, power. He wrought with a rude chisel, and from no model but the vision of his meditations. With time and labor, the crag took human shape, and there it stands, colossal, dark and frowning, half statue, half rock, in the former sense, terrible and goblin-like, in the latter, almost beautiful. For its colouring is of mellow grey, and moorland moss clothes it, and heath, with its blooming bells and balmy fragrance, grows faithfully close to the giant's foot. When it was published, the immature but very real powers revealed in Wuthering Heights were scarcely recognized. Its import and nature were misunderstood. The identity of its author was misrepresented, and it was said that this was an earlier and ruder attempt of the same pen which had produced Jane Eyre. Unjust and grievous error. We laughed at it at first, but I deeply lament it now.
At Wuthering Heights, as at Haworth, for Heathcliff as for Emily, death seems to be everywhere. And death, omnipresent in the works of the Bronte sisters, strikes pitilessly at all members of the Haworth Presbytery. After the death of the mother and the two elder sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, it is Branwell's turn to die, at barely 30 years of age.
Around me the grey tombs stretched their shadows far away. There, under the grass I tread, silent and alone, like the dead.
Thus, Emily's sorrow spills out into words. And Emily herself survives her brother by no more than a year. Weak, ill, she nevertheless continues to write. Her last verses are steeped in a mystical apprehension of the universe.
The details of her illness are deep branded in my memory. Never in all her life had she lingered over any task that lay before her, and she did not linger now. She sank rapidly. She made haste to leave us. I have never seen anything like it. But indeed, I have never seen her parallel in anything. Stronger than a man, simpler than a child, her nature stood alone.
A few months later, Anne Bronte, suffering from the same illness, joins her sister in death. Charlotte lived 5 more years, marrying in the last year of her life and dying in childbirth. The Brontes created their literature out of their unconscious. One woman created hers out of her life. A life which embodied such passion, courage, spirit and energy, and genius, that those who knew her and had never known a literary woman of her kind before called her a great man, who was all woman. Georges Sand was born in the year that Napoleon Bonaparte was crowned emperor. Her name, Amantine Aurore Lucille Dupin. On her father's side, she is the descendant of a Saxon king of Poland. On her mother's, a French bird seller. Her father died when she was 4. She was brought up on her grandmother's estate at Nohant. On her grandmother's death, she inherits the manor house and the estate. A year later, at the age of 18, she marries Casimir Dudevant. She has 2 children, but this loveless marriage does not satisfy for very long. The young woman aspires above all to be free. Within 15 months, she has left her husband and gone to Paris. On the 18th of May, 1832, she publishes her first novel, Indiana, under the nom de plume of Georges Sand. It is at a dinner organized by the review Des Deux Mondes that chance places Georges Sand and the poet Alfred de Musset side by side. Alfred de Musset, young, handsome, a poet with a libertine reputation. After reading her first novel, he writes her a poem called After Reading Indiana. Few writers could resist such attention. Few women could resist Alfred de Musset. One passage from Indiana perfectly describes Georges Sand herself.
A typical woman, weak as well as strong, at once weary of the air she breathes and capable of shouldering the heavens, timid in everyday life, yet bold in days of battle. This is woman, an incredible mixture of weakness and energy, greatness and pettiness, a being forever composed of 2 opposed natures, now sublime, now wretched, skilled in deceiving, yet easily deceived.
The caricature portraits of Georges Sand have created a creature who is, all at once, a transvestite, lesbian, man-eater, and nymphomaniac. A kind of wax figure dressed in trousers, smoking a cigar, and eating a pale and lean Chopin for dessert. She is not remembered for her femininity, her generosity, her idealism, her romantic high-mindedness, and her view that love, is always divine in its essence and ennobling. The adoption of male dress began with her literary life in Paris.
It was a disguise. I first had made for myself a long man's coat in heavy grey cloth with matching trousers and waistcoat. I felt I could go round the world. In my clothes I had no fear. I could walk in the rain, sit in the theatre pit, in the cheap seats reserved for male students. I could walk all night. I was no longer a lady, and I wasn't a gentleman. No one guessed at my disguise.
Georges Sand writes frankly to her old friend and accomplice, Sainte-Beuve.
I have fallen in love, and this time very seriously, with Alfred de Musset.
Georges, I have something foolish and ridiculous to tell you. You will laugh at me. You will say I am lying. I am in love with you.
Je le suis depuis le premier jour. Je n'espère rien en vous disant cela. Mais la vérité...
I have been in love with you since the first day I came to see you. I have no hopes. I can only lose a friend.
Il y a des jours où je me tuerai.
There are days when I could kill myself, but I weep and then I burst into laughter. Georges, I love you like a child.
Comme un enfant. Vous m'aimez comme un enfant. Like a child? You love me like a child? Happy. Very happy. Each day I care for him more. Each day the little things which made me suffer seem to disappear. Each day I see fine things that I admire. Above all, he is fair. He is kind. And his intimacy is as precious as the preference he shows for me is sweet. The life of my heart is at peace, and I am searching for nothing.
Do not gaze too long at the moon, I beg you. And do not die before we have completed that dream plan for a trip we have spoken of.
Venice, city of infinite, indeterminate desires. Away from French society that stands in the way of the happiness of which she dreams, the supreme emotional intensity to be achieved in ideal love, Georges comes to Venice to celebrate passion and the rights of passion. But when she attempts to share with Musset this religion of love, the result is violent disillusion.
Faith alone makes for love, and he who lacks the first will be denied the second.
Sand and Musset fall alternately ill in Venice. A young doctor, Pietro Pagello, is sent for. Musset, cured, plunges into Venetian nightlife, enjoying the debauchery inspired by Byronic myths. Sand becomes the lover of the Dr. Pagello. Terrible scenes occur with Musset now very ill again. In March, Musset returns to Paris. Georges Sand remains in Venice, impoverished by her lover's journey. She writes into the hours of the night in order to pay for her return to Paris. Out of the disaster of love, she brings 3 novels, and her remarkable Letters of a Traveler. When she finally returns to Paris, there is a brief and passionate reunion with Musset.
Do not ever think that I could be happy at the thought of having lost your heart. Whether I inspired love or friendship, whether I have been happy or unhappy, none of this changes anything inside my soul. We followed our destiny and our temperaments, more mordant and more passionate than those of others, passions which prevented us from knowing the ordinary happiness of lovers. Oh, my child, I need your affection and forgiveness. We have been lovers. We know each other to the bottom of our soul. You're right. Our embraces were incestuous, but we were innocent. Innocent and sincere.
Georges Sand was not capable of not living the life of the heart. Her ideal was that of a perfect friendship between a man and a woman, without rivalry or dominance. Of 2 people held together in unity and in wholeness, following nature's supreme law. In her relationship with the great composer and musician Chopin, she came close to having the kind of human love she most wanted. Love which meant shared work, shared reflection, shared commitments. It was Franz Liszt who introduced his 2 close friends to one another. And if Chopin at first found Georges too masculine, he was soon converted by the intensity of her uninhibited emotions, as well as by her impressive musical knowledge and understanding. They remained together a little more than 8 years, secluded for most of the time at her estate at Nohant. Here they abandoned themselves to a creative relationship which allowed each of them to fully develop their work and their life. The painter Delacroix has left this glimpse of life there.
The place is very pleasant, and the host could not have been more genial. Sometimes, through the windows opening onto the garden, you could hear wafts of Chopin's music.
In the evening, in the big hall of the ground floor, while Chopin was composing, Georges Sand was writing her finest novels.
Tenez ceci pour vous. Il y a 1 heure, vous aviez l'idée de manger, et à présent, vous avez l'idée de dormir.
Votre dernière heure?
Venez. Allons, venez lire avec moi. Là. Et à présent, vous avez l'idée de dormir.
Marie?
Marie, the longer I live, the more I see that the ideas of youth, love's exclusive ardor, and its claim for total possession and eternal rights are wrong.
I concede conjugal fidelity to certain exceptional people. Most of us have other needs, other powers. For some, mutual freedom and tolerance, abhorrence of all jealous egoism. For others, mystical ardors and silent passions, a long and powerful holding back.
Are all people alike? Do all men have the same power?
Some men are born for the austerity of religious life, some for the languors of sensual pleasure, others for the struggles of passion, others for the dream world of poetry.
Nothing is more arbitrary than the meaning of true love.
All lovers are true, whether they are passionate or peaceful, sensual or ascetic, lasting or fleeting.
Loves of the mind can be as great as loves of the heart. They can have the same violence, the same power.
Sensual love can be made pure and holy through struggle and sacrifice.
Sensual love? Sensual love.
Frédéric. Frédéric. Mon Chopinski.
During their 8 years together, Chopin created his greatest works, in spite of his fragile spirit and the tuberculosis that would eventually kill him.
His creation is spontaneous and miraculous. He finds it without seeking, without foreseeing it, but then begins the most heart-rending labor I have ever seen. He shuts himself up for days, weeping, walking, writing, breaking pens, changing everything, beginning again.
When her son Maurice was a child, Georges had developed a great love for puppets, with which she amused him. Now her mania for puppets was channeled into her work. Her pastoral novels were dramatized for them, and Chopin wrote the musical accompaniments for this informal theater. At Nohant, surrounded by friends, children, neighbors, guests, these are the years of her happiness. She thrives, as Chopin suffers.
I know he is too delicate, too exquisite, too perfect a nature to live long off our fat, heavy terrestrial existence.
Georges wants the house to be permanently filled with artists, friends, children. Chopin needs more and more silence and solitude. He has only 3 years left to live. In 1846, Georges Sand ends her relationship with Chopin. She throws herself into a period of feverish political activity. She attempts to start a newspaper, The People's Cause. During the overthrow of the monarchy in 1848, she leaves for Paris and virtually becomes Minister of Propaganda with the new Republican government. The disillusion and terror of the insurrection in June 1848 forces her to return to Nohant to refuge. Gathered together, her writings would fill more than 150 volumes. Seen against the activity of her life, her output is astonishing. She wrote, it is true, partly for money. Her estate at Nohant never brought her income, and indeed required much of what she earned to keep it together. Her children were supported throughout their lives by what she earned as a writer. Her bohemian lifestyle, combined with warmth, responsibility, and wisdom, make her a greater heroine than any she created.
Georges Sand. Georges Sand. And now I am attached to it, this name of mine. I was baptized, unknown, free, between the manuscript of Indiana, which was then my whole future, and a 1,000-franc note, which was then my whole fortune. It was a contract, a new marriage between the poor apprentice writer that I was and the kind muse who had consoled me in my difficult days. God defend me from interfering with the laws of destiny. What is a name, anyway, in our revolutionary world? A number for those who do nothing. A symbol for those who work and fight. This name I've been given, I've made myself, and I alone, finally, by my labor.
In 1853, in exile on Jersey, Victor Hugo wrote about Georges Sand.
In antiquity, woman was a slave. In the Middle Ages, a servant. In the Ancien Regime, she was a citizen. For the Empire, a female. For the future, she is a woman. Georges Sand is the apostle of the future of women. Madame de Sévigné was the fan. Madame de Staël was the pen. Georges Sand is the tool.
The Romantic era succeeded in creating a new kind of woman. In paintings, in fiction, and indeed in real life. A woman capable of great passion, who acknowledges and acts on her sexuality, and who is intellectually ambitious instead of socially ambitious. In short, a whole woman. Many men were appalled at the new woman, including many of those writers and philosophers whose works had helped towards her birth. It didn't matter. The romantic woman, like Frankenstein's monster, breathed hard. A compulsive motion agitated her limbs and her mind. Without her, contemporary civilization is inconceivable.